Hi, my name's Em, and this study explores what resilience is related to in counselling students. Resilience is widely seen as essential in counselling practice, both for maintaining practitioner well-being and for working effectively with clients. Research consistently links it to reduced burnout and better therapeutic outcomes. People like Scoville and Trotter Matheson and Pereira and colleagues have made that point quite strongly. Counselling is an emotionally demanding profession. Practitioners are regularly engaging with distress, holding complex relational dynamics, and managing their own responses. So, resilience isn't just helpful, it's often seen as essential for sustaining practice over time. But alongside that, there are also quite strong assumptions about where resilience comes from, particularly around age, life experience, and social support. And these assumptions play an important role in how we think about training and readiness for training within the profession. So this study sets out to examine those assumptions more closely. These are the factors we tend to assume matter. There's quite a strong, almost intuitive belief that older trainees are more resilient, that more life experience somehow translates into greater emotional capacity, and that having strong support networks provides a kind of buffer against stress. And these ideas don't just sit in the background, they're quite embedded in how we think about the profession. They show up in everyday conversations and also more subtly in training expectations and in how readiness is understood. For example, social support is often described as protective in resilience research. Osbey, Southwick et al. All come to that conclusion. And similarly, life experience is often assumed to contribute to emotional depth and self-awareness and the ability to manage difficulty. Course entry requirements and guidance materials often highlight the importance of self-awareness, emotional stability, the ability to manage psychological demands, alongside the value of prior life or work experience. And often counselling attracts older and more mature entrants, and that's seen as valued in different course literature. So taken together, these factors begin to form a kind of implicit model of what a resilient trainee might look like. And while that model feels quite convincing, it's worth asking how much of it is actually grounded in evidence within this specific context. And that's really where this study begins. So why does it matter? Well, counselling training is emotionally demanding in a way that's quite distinct from many other academic programs. Trainees are not only learning theory, but they're working with clients, engaging in supervision, participating in peer support programs, and reflecting on their own emotional processes. So resilience is closely tied not just to well-being, but to professional development and competence. And importantly, assumptions about resilience may influence who is seen as ready for training, often favouring maturity and life experience. So understanding what actually relates to resilience has clear practical implications. Let's frame this conceptually. So resilience has been understood in different ways. Earlier models, you tended to treat it as a relatively stable trait, something internal to the individual, something you either have or you don't. But more recent thinking shifts away from that and instead sees resilience as something dynamic, something shaped through interaction between individuals and their situations, their environments. Ungar talks about this extensively, and Windle also describes resilience as a process rather than a fixed quality. So from that perspective, resilience isn't just something people bring with them, it's something that develops within particular contexts. Across the literature, you see links with personality, coping strategies, and social support, but findings aren't always consistent, and importantly, they vary across population. So the question becomes whether those same patterns apply within counselling trainees. The relationship between demographics and resilience has had significant attention across student communities globally. However, resilience profiles are highly context dependent. And given what we already know about the notable differences in the nature of counselling training to other academic courses, these findings may not transfer tidily to counselling trainees. That was the conclusion of Janouch et al. In 2022. What little study that has been done has been completed in entirely different contexts, notably other countries, the States, for example, with different training structures using different measures and often quite a while ago, pre-COVID. And this is true also of social support. There's very little research examining these relationships specifically in UK counselling trainees. So although these ideas are widely held, they're not well established within this particular population, and that creates a gap, especially given how central resilience is considered to be within the counselling profession. This exploratory study asked, is resilience associated with age, educational hiatus, and perceived social support in UK counselling trainees? This was a quantitative, cross-sectional, correlational design. And the study was conducted using the SciToolkit online survey platform, and this enabled standardized presentation of materials, secure data collection, and automated data storage. The final sample included 49 UK trainee counsellors recruited through the university's sonar system, social media, and the boards of counselling professional bodies. So the measures then. We measured resilience using the Brief Resilience Scale, the BRS. This captures the ability to bounce back from stress. For social support, we use the Multidimensional Scale of Perceived Social Support, the MSPSS. This looks at the support given by family and friends and significant others. It's a kind of generalised support. Age and educational hiatus were collected through self-report. These are all established measures used widely in psychological research. For this study, we sought approval from Bangor University School of Psychology and Sports Science Research Ethics and Governance Committee before data collection, and ethical approval was granted. And also in accordance with the BPS Code of Human Research Ethics and the BACP Ethical Framework. That's a lot of words. It's a bit of a mouthful. Informed consent was obtained electronically. Every participant had an information sheet and was informed fully of their rights to withdraw without penalty at any point prior to submission of their responses, and also informed of the limits of withdrawal once data had been anonymised. No identifying information was collected. However, if somebody provided an email address for follow-up, this was stored separately so that the two wouldn't be linked together. Because of the nature of the questions reflecting on personal resilience, there was deemed to be some psychological risk of distress. To mitigate that, obviously, the participation was entirely voluntary. And we mitigated it also with the provision of appropriate support. Because the information was anonymous, there could be no direct follow-up afterwards. So all participants were signposted to seek support independently should they need it. And the study used respectful, bias-free language throughout, in line with APA guidance. Spearman's correlations were used to examine relationships between the variables, and no causation was inferred. So what did we find? Well, interestingly, none of the variables showed a significant relationship with resilience. Age, no relationship. Educational hiatus, no relationship. And social support, no relationship. So none of those factors that we might assume matter actually showed a relationship in this sample. And in fact, the only statistically significant finding was the relationship between age and time away, which is natural, to be expected, and unimportant. So what do we do with that? These findings suggest that these variables may not be linked to resilience in a simple or a direct way within this population. That doesn't mean they're irrelevant, but it suggests their influence may be more complex or may operate indirectly. And it also raises questions about generalization. Patterns identified in other groups may not apply in the same way here. So rather than viewing resilience as something fixed, maybe more accurate to think of it as something shaped by context and experience. And in this case, the context is training. One further possibility is that resilience in this population may be embedded within the process itself. Counselling training involves ongoing supervision, reflective practice, relational engagement, all of which may contribute to the development of resilience over time. So rather than resilience being something trainees bring with them, it may be something that develops through the experience of training. Have a little bit of a closer look. One of the most interesting findings in this study is around social support, because this does contrast with a large body of research linking social support and resilience, and in this study we didn't see that relationship. Now, one possible explanation is that the type of support being measured doesn't fully reflect what matters in this context. The scale captures general social support, but counselling training involves quite specific forms of relational support, supervision, peer reflection, shared learning. So it may not be that support doesn't matter, but perhaps the type of support matters. And that suggests we need to be more precise about what we mean by support when we talk about resilience in counselling trainees. A second important issue is how resilience itself is being measured. So the brief resilience scale focuses on the ability to bounce back from stress. It's very valid, but it's also quite narrow. There are broader ways of understanding resilience. Connor and Davidson included things like ongoing adaptation, meaning making, and the ability to function under sustained pressure. It's also possible that resilience is not stable even within individuals, but varies across different contexts and demands. So, for example, a trainee may show resilience in one area, such as maybe academic work, but experience real difficulty in another, like clinical practice. And that kind of variability is unlikely to be captured by a single global measure. So it's possible that this study is capturing only one aspect of resilience, and different aspects may relate differently to variables like support or life experience. So the absence of relationships here may reflect how resilience is being defined, rather than suggesting that there are no relationships at all. And that highlights how much our findings depend on how we measure the concepts we're interested in. So what are the implications? First off, these findings challenge the assumption that age or life experience equate to readiness for training. And that raises an ethical issue. If assumptions about age influence selection, that's a risk of bias, where individuals are advantaged or disadvantaged without clear evidence. Professional frameworks like that of the BACP emphasise fairness and inclusivity, so this matters. And it becomes particularly important when we consider access to training. If certain groups are implicitly viewed as more ready, for example, older applicants or those with more life experience, then others may be overlooked, even if they are equally capable of developing resilience within training. So there's a potential risk here, not necessarily of explicit discrimination, but of unexamined assumptions shaping decision making. And from an ethical perspective, that's something that needs careful consideration. It suggests the selection processes may need to focus more clearly on demonstrable competencies rather than inferred qualities like resilience based on background. Secondly, it suggests a shift from selecting resilient individuals to supporting resilience development within training. And third, this places greater emphasis on how training environments support development. So rather than asking who is more resilient, we may need to ask what actually supports resilience during training. There are limitations to consider with this study. The sample size limits statistical power. This was an exploratory small study, so smaller effects might not have been detected. The cross-sectional design captures resilience at a single point in time, whereas it's likely to develop over time. The measures may not fully capture the complexity or context-specific nature of resilience and support, and the findings are really specific to UK counselling trainees. These limitations do point to future research. Future directions would maybe be larger representative UK samples, a longitudinal tracking across the whole duration of a training course, including training-specific variables like supervision and reflective practice may provide more insight. And qualitative or mixed methods approaches may capture the complexity of resilience in this population. And broader or alternative resilience measures. So overall, resilience in this sample was not associated with age, educational hiatus, or general social support. But rather than concluding these factors are unimportant, these findings suggest resilience may not be adequately explained by demographic variables alone. Instead, perhaps it's shaped by context, process, and training experience. And this shifts the question from who is resilient enough to train to what conditions allow resilience to develop during training. Thank you for listening to this presentation. If you'd like to read the references, you might like to press pause now and read this slide and then move on to the second slide.